The year is 1999, and the place is Nakuru County. A young 9-year-old boy goes to school one Friday, and he doesn't feel well. But he doesn't tell anyone because he's supposed to man up, as we were taught from an early age. He goes through the motions, goes to class, plays football, has his lunch, and when the bell goes at 1 o'clock, he makes his way home. Mom is not home. Dad is not home either. At 7 p.m. that Friday evening, I collapsed at home. I woke up 5 hours later in a hospital bed with my mother deep in prayer, hoping that I would come through. And when she saw me, she smiled. I thought the worst was over. It had only begun. The doctors diagnosed me as having malaria after they took a blood sample. There was a bigger issue that lay below, and it would only come to pass 2 weeks on when the same incident happened. Only this time, I was in class. I didn't even know when I collapsed that day. I just found myself back in that hospital bed, ward number 211, Evans Sunrise Hospital in Nakuru. The doctors were baffled. What would happen to this really energetic, bubbly, handsome young man? And they recommended further tests. My mother sought the help of my grandfather, now late, who was a medical doctor in the city. And I was brought to MP Shah Hospital in that March of 1999. They did a scan and they discovered that I have seizure disorder. This was an episode where the seizures got the better of me. Because seizures are very delicate and sensitive, they can hamper a child's growth. So I was put on medication for a period of 1 year to put them under control. Satisfied after my scan and tests had finally discovered the elephant in the room and the ugly monster that dared want to devour me at such a tender age, I returned home with my mother. Apparently, that was the start of something that would change the course of my life forever. 2 days after we returned home, on a Sunday night, my auntie, who was living with us, sexually abused me. I remember it because it was 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday, the same year of 1999. Life would never be the same again. Anyone would say that, well, why don't you go and tell mommy that you were violated? Why wouldn't you go and say something to dad who considers you the apple of his eye? But who would believe me? I was 9, and she was older. They would say that I'm looking to just find something evil against her. And I would be on the receiving end of it. I would get a hiding because my father is a strict disciplinarian. And so I retreated to silence because it was the only language that I knew. It was the only language that I could speak. It didn't last for 1 year, no 2. It lasted for more than I could have imagined. Roughly, my whole childhood was robbed. my innocence was taken away from me, and I carried this scar with me until I couldn't anymore. I went through the motions like any normal child would, but it wasn't the same. From that moment on, I felt filthy. I felt unworthy. I felt like the universe had conspired to just destroy me. Imagine coming back from hospital, getting medication to treat your seizures, and then your own family breaks you, robs you of your innocence, and much more importantly, robs you of what you considered a lovely and happy home. It made me subject to so much at school. A year later, in the year 2000, my classroom teacher, when giving advice about careers and who would succeed in school, in a class of 62 pupils, made a very, very curt remark about me. And she said, "Suppose one day I go to the market and then on my left side I might see a market hawker carrying a sack of maize on their shoulder, and they're asking me to give way. And when I look at them closely, they would resemble Erick Opon." My entire class of 62 pupils laughed at me. I still have their laugh at the back of my mind, 21 years on. And that changed the trajectory of my academic pursuits. I became among the last in class in performance. It affected my esteem. Imagine, you're 1.87 meters back then, but you're not as audacious or your shoulders are not held high, and you end up always walking with your head down. You consider yourself not a human anymore, but a lesser being. Maybe you believe, like the writers say, that you're a child of a lesser God. Maybe you think you're not worth all this. So you let the world have its way, and mostly, when you let the world have its way, it changes the script of your life. That's what mine went through. I underwent the worst form of bullying, the worst form of abuse you would from friends. Not because I had less self-belief in myself, but because I carried a scar that started as a wound, but that I let break me down. Through humanity, we learn that resilience is knowing what matters at key moments. The one person who I owe my whole life to and who taught me that art is my mother. Because one, she was there at my lowest when I almost lost my life. And she worked as hard as possible to make sure that I would have my health. She's my prayer warrior, my first love. I owed her the chance to succeed, to see her smile, because her smile makes me wear one too. And so I pulled myself back up, academically speaking, went through the motions, got good enough grades to take me to a decent school, Menengai High School. That's when the course of my life started to change, because I discovered my love for language, for literature, for poetry, which is the way I express myself best when the world doesn't understand me, doesn't understand me well. Still, in all this, I never had the audacity or courage to talk to my parents, to just tell them what had happened to me. Even after my auntie passed away, I still didn't have the courage to let it out. I went through high school like a normal teenager would, trying to discover, trying to explore, trying to make sense of what future you would want. But still, I felt like a second-class citizen. The emotion never left. I always felt filthy, unworthy. I thought that once I graduated, when I would find a relationship, maybe I would confide to the people or to the person who would love me or who would wish to spend the rest of their lives by my side. How wrong I was. Every time I would confide in that deep little secret, the person who was in my life at that moment would cease to be my girlfriend and become ex-girlfriend. They excluded themselves from my life. The solitude was too much. It was unbearable. And I did not understand how to let it out. Until one time when I was servicing a meeting in the second half of 2020 on my birthday by the Mastercard Foundation about resilience. And one of the speakers, a clinical psychology expert by the name Tabitha Mpamira, was speaking about trauma. She has a TED talk on the same, and she said during her presentation that trauma not transformed is transferred. And she went on to explain what had happened to her as a child. As a refugee in a Ugandan refugee camp, fleeing from the scars that had been visited upon them by the Rwandan genocide, she was raped by one of her uncles and another caregiver. She had lived through the same thing that I had been going through, albeit in a different land. She had gone through worse, but had chosen to forgive and had chosen to heal and no longer carry those scars. And ladies and gentlemen, right there and then, I think I found my saving grace. So on my 30th birthday, 21 years after the act had happened, I vowed to do something. I vowed to finally open up to my parents. It still wasn't easy. I struggled. Would they break down when they heard this news? How would they see me? What would they say? It had been so long. She had already passed on. There was no one to point an accusing finger to. I also took this decision because of another monumental occurrence that took place. One of those people who excluded themselves from my life is the mother of my son. After that meeting by Mastercard Foundation, I vowed I would not pass on the trauma that I had carried for so long and that looked like a never-ending migraine. The ones that come when you least expect and they show up when you least desire. I was not going to pass that to my son. He was the one who gave me the extra impetus and the extra force to finally open up. I owed it to him because I'm his father. I'm the one he runs and comes home to, the one he calls Papa. If Papa wasn't okay, Louis wasn't okay. And I treat my son like a king. And so early this year, I sat my parents down at different occasions and finally let it all out. The emotion was palpable. It was understandable. I'm the firstborn in my family. My parents are also firstborn. That comes with a lot of leadership responsibilities. Whether we like it or not, we're supposed to show the way for the ones who follow. It broke my mother. It broke her deeply. But she was happy that I had come through because I could do something to spare myself the agony of carrying this scar for a father 21 or more years. On March 20th, 2019, I suffered a repeat episode of the seizures. One day when I was just too stressed and I just imagined the past. The skeletons came out. The monsters came back for me. I was taken to Mater Hospital. Like it happened 10 years before, I was misdiagnosed. They thought it was a stomach infection. A friend asked me to seek a second opinion, and they discovered my seizures had come back. Like all stories of adversity and triumph, my parents have taught me that when you have a smooth interior and a tough exterior, you can overcome anything. I was back on medication, but I can safely tell you that in 3 months' time, I'll be off medication, and this time I have made it intentional. I am not going back to that ever again. My parents are still struggling to process this information because it's been 21 years. That's a lifetime. So much has happened. We've all grown. I am no longer a child. I have a son, and I want to give him the best family when that time comes, and when that person who's willing to accept who I am finally comes through. There has been hope. There are those who love me for what I am. There are those who are beginning to accept that beyond what you see at face value, there's something deeper. It just wasn't expressed enough or earlier. This incident has not been easy to share with the world. It hasn't even been easy for me. I had been angry, but I retreated into silence. It was a language that understood me. We were bosom buddies, but in the darkness we stayed. I don't know, maybe that's the reason my complexion is a bit special. Darkness has a way with me. But jokes aside, I watch my son as he plays with me, as he learns his steps and as he learns to speak. And I want to protect him from the harm. I want to protect him from all the iniquities that the world might have in store. I have carried a scar for 21 years. It followed me like a civil war that was never ending. It never gives you peace. You always remember the gunshots, the grenades. You remember the broken families, broken homes. My heart was a debris, but Tabitha helped me pick up the pieces. And I might not know her, but I am forever grateful for the lesson. As an expert now, I'm a translator and interpreter with organizations, and I've had the privilege of working in several countries in Africa. I have learned that I never looked at myself as the carrier of hope. I never held on to hope that I actually believed I was worthy. But until I learned to deal with my trauma, until I looked into my son's eyes and made that vow, I will never put him through suffering, but I will give him what life never gave me. I have learned to smile better. I've learned to take a minute, slow down, and just smell the beauty that is this world. Everyone would look at you, well, you're 1.92 meters, it's no fault of your own. It's nature and genes that work out, but even tall people can get broken. Don't be lied to. We're all human at the end of the day. But someone said, we sometimes look at the stars in the sky and we forget the flowers that bloom right under our feet. For the longest time, my sexual abuse incident had made that flower wither. I now watch it grow, with as much intentionality to live anew. And I watch it grow not only because I owe myself a second chance at life, not only because I owe myself the capacity to live and to enjoy of what this life has for me, but because I want to do what my heart has always loved. I want to help people discover their greatness. I didn't see this in me earlier. Everyone else did. Now, even in my professional world, when people see me and single me out for opportunities and possibilities, they want me to lead. They want me to take that first step. They trust me. I didn't trust myself that much. But that new flower in my garden, I'm going to water it. I'm going to watch it bloom. I'm going to see its sweetness as it develops in my garden. And I'm going to share that hope in the world. Because there is no need to hide anymore. Plus, I can't hide. I'm 6'3".